Hello, welcome to Enough with the Science. I'm Joe.
And I'm Senan, and this is the podcast where we take some completely obscure and boring science topic and we make sure that you will never have any interest in it ever again.
Yes, you will end up screaming enough with the science before the end of this podcast, and we're making no bones about this week's topic.
Joe, that is the worst pun I've heard in a long time.
No, it's early yet. It's early. We're only a couple of minutes in.
You're supposed to be the funny man of this duo.
Nobody gave me that responsibility.
You're failing miserably. Anyway, this week our topic is extinct human species, which is a little bit of a clickbaity title, unfortunately.
Now, for anybody who's living in a cave, see what I did there?
Caves. Caves are also relevant to this week's topic.
So,
yes,
clickbait. Go on, what does clickbait mean?
You know those overly enthusiastic headlines that have certain buzzwords or buzz phrases in them that attract people's attention. They're just trying to get their eyeballs into your eyeballs rather into their news page because they have it plastered with adverts.
Essentially a lie. What you're saying is it's essentially not true.
Well, to quote our Prime Minister, who recently was accused of telling a lie in the Dáil, he said, actually, no, it was an untruth, not a lie.
Yes, there is a very subtle difference.
I'm not quite sure what it is. Anyway, on with the show. The reason why it's a bit clickbaity is, of course, there's not really any extinct human species. We're talking about human-like species that are gone extinct.
So human-like is sort of like the way you feel after like a night out the next morning. You're kind of not quite human.
No, actually, I think probably you feel a little bit too human the next morning.
Yes, possibly. So, well, I think we might need to define human-like in this context then.
Yeah, so we are talking about, as you probably know, our closest living other species are chimps and bonobos. You know, they're...
You speak for yourself.
And, you know, we've analysed... When I say we, I mean scientists who know about these things, have analysed the DNA of those creatures plus ours, and they can see that there's an enormous amount of commonality. There's only like 1 or 2% of a difference. But they've also known from that analysis that there is a common ancestor, that chimps, bonobos and ourselves all descended from a common ancestor who is now extinct. We don't know exactly what that common ancestor looked like, but these human-like species I'm talking about also would have descended from that common ancestor that was common to chimps, bonobos and us.
So, okay, so there's the chimps and bonobos, poor old gorillas and stuff, we're leaving them out. They're like kind of...
They're further out on the tree. They're not as closely related to us.
But they could still be human-like? No, they're not.
No, they're in a different branch.
They're a different branch completely.
Yeah.
And so then from this one species, approximately 16 or 17 years ago.
16 or 17 years ago.
Yeah, like this overarching species, how long ago are we talking? Are we talking...
Oh, we are probably talking 5 to 8 million years, something like that.
Oh, okay, so long time ago.
Sounds like an awfully long time. Do you remember the planet is like 4 billion years old? So that's 4,000 million years old.
And it was still a long time if you were, I don't know, waiting for a bus or...
Well, if anecdotes in Dublin are true, some people do indeed wait that length of time for a bus and then it doesn't come even though the sign says there should be one. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. That's what we are here to digress.
So, for me, I suppose one of the most mind-boggling aspects of all of this is the fact that, you know, there's actually about 20 of these species that have been discovered from fossils. I mean, everybody's probably heard of Neanderthals, and for a long time I would have assumed that was the only pre-human, you know, species that was around. But actually, based on the fossils that have been found, like there's about 20 of them, which is, imagine if they were all still around, what the world would be like now.
Oh, I don't really want to imagine that.
Well, considering the amount of bigotry and, you know, abuse we give other members of our own species who look a little bit different from us, maybe because of skin colour or whatever, I'd hate to think what would go on if there was all these other species around, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe that's an overly pessimistic view of the world.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Sarah.
But I guess we should probably talk about fossils and what they are.
Why?
Because fossils are how we know these things exist. If it wasn't for fossils, we wouldn't know any of these things exist, or did exist once upon a time. None of them exist now, as far as we know, unless they're very good at hiding.
So before the fossils, there was no idea, like... So before the fossil hunters, nobody knew that there were other species than us before us.
So one or two of the more recent ones, the more advanced ones, we'll call them, have left things like art and jewellery and stuff behind, and tools and things. But probably it was assumed that was all human sourced before we understood that some of these other creatures existed, you know.
Right. So I can imagine that the first person who discovered a new species of human-like creature probably met with some pushback.
I would think so,
from the powers that be.
I mean, you know, in times gone past, obviously, certain school of thought that was popular amongst the establishment was that, you know, humans were special, where there was nothing else on the earth with the same, you know, prowess as humans and the same abilities and so on. So, yeah, I mean, it took an awful long time for the scientific mainstream, I think, to accept that we are just evolved animals, that we've evolved from the same stock as...
We're essentially really, really smart monkeys.
Well, yeah, we are essentially monkeys who think they're smart.
Yes, well, I've taught themselves smart.
But yeah, the fossils are basically... So, I mean, most creatures that die, they don't end up becoming fossils because, you know, their remains are scavenged.
Some animals that are alive are a bit fossil-like. Not looking at anybody in particular across the table.
I have no idea who you're speaking about because I don't own any mirrors. So I mean, in order for something to become a fossil, they're rare enough because in order for something to become a fossil, it has to be covered up with mud or silt or sand or something very quickly after it dies, so that the remains lay undisturbed, and then later on that mud or silt or whatever it's encased in has to become waterlogged, and what happens then is typically the softer parts of the creature do decompose, but the harder parts like bones and teeth, the minerals that are in the water that stuff is submerged in, kind of gradually make their way into the bones and into the teeth and solidify them. And so you've got bones and teeth or whatever left over from the creature, and then that's submerged in a mixture of mud and water and what have you, and the water contains minerals that it has leached out of rocks at some point in the past, and those minerals later on leach into the bones and teeth of the creature and kind of solidify them into the fossil.
And so the fossil is not bone anymore?
There'd be some organic material in it, yeah. But generally speaking, in order for it to survive down through millions of years, it's got to be predominantly rock. But they have managed to extract bits of DNA from fossils, so not all of the organic material is destroyed, you know. And
so will they be able to bring these back to life if they have them in?
Well, that was the Jurassic Park premise. Do we want?
Don't destroy it for people. Don't destroy it for people.
Anything's possible. I mean, we may reach a stage where we can actually create any DNA that we want. You know, we can't really do it now. We can edit the existing DNA, but we can't wholesale create a brand new genome. But it's probably not a million miles away that we might be able to do that at some point. Whether it's advisable or not is another matter.
Since when has that ever stopped us?
Yeah, indeed.
So, tell us about a few of these people.
Well, I suppose the first thing you've got to ask yourself when you realise there was 20 species is, you know, how come we're still around and they aren't? Have we outlasted them all? And that's not entirely true. So we've been around, humans have been around for about 300,000 years. And some of these other creatures were around for over 1 million. In fact, in the case of one particular species, probably about 1.5 million years. So some of them were around a lot longer than us, and they appeared a lot earlier. Like the earliest ones go back to about 4 million years ago. So, you know, they were around a lot sooner than we were. So it's not so much that we have outlasted them as we're in terms of the age of the Earth, we are a relatively young species. We're only 300,000 years old.
And how likely is it that we're going to make it to 1 million years? That's a long way away.
That's more than three times our current age. Yeah, you'd have to wonder, wouldn't you, with the development of powerful weaponry and God knows, climate change and you name it.
But if they were here for 1 million years and we've been here for 300,000 years, and look at the damage we're doing to ourselves. So theoretically, they should have come up with interesting technology stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we've only had anything you might call a civilization, like cities or societies or whatever, for less than 10,000 years. So we were around for an awful long time before we did any of that stuff. But, you know, for the ones that are around for a million years, you got to think that there's at least a possibility that they came up with some kind of organized civilization, some kind of technology, be it very rudimentary, you know, some kind of buildings.
Well, even language, you would imagine that
language, agriculture, fishing, maybe, you know, that kind of stuff. But we haven't found any evidence
playing the
of
drums.
it. Huh?
I bet you were playing the drums. I bet you got that far.
Yeah. But no, we haven't found any evidence. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I mean, it was a long time ago, so it could have happened. You know, the evidence might just have disappeared over time.
Yeah. So a few of these characters.
Yeah, and we did. Just to go back on something, I don't want to create the impression that they were all gone before we arrived. We humans did coexist with some of the later, more advanced ones, which we'll talk about in a minute. But let's go back a little bit further. One of the most famous ones was called fossils was called Lucy. She was found in Ethiopia. Her official Latin name, Australopithecus afarensis.
I prefer Lucy.
And that was her species existed between 3 to 4 million years ago. So they lasted about 1 million years. Any idea how she got her name?
Because she wasn't tightly packed into it wherever she was, whatever sort
that
of
That
receptacle.
would be Loosey. No, she's Lucy, and it's, I'm afraid, the simplest
She was
explanation.
Juicy Lucy. No.
That could have been it. I think somebody on the archaeology team was a big Beatles fan. So Lucy was in the sky.
Aha.
Anyway, the reason she's so famous is because they found about 40% of a complete skeleton, which in fossil terms, that's like a huge amount. Normally they find like one jawbone or a hand or something. So to find like 40% of a complete skeleton was a huge find. And since then, you know, they have found other examples of that species in other places. And
did they find Lucy? Was it like a skeleton, like together, that the rest had sort of disintegrated, or there was a bit of her over here and there was a bit of her over there, or like kind of she was scattered around the place in some sort of ritualistic, horrific
although I was
event.
a member of that archaeology team, I was on a day off that particular day.
I thought so.
So, like, who knows where exactly they found Lucy, but I'm sure there's a little bit of homework for our listeners now.
Absolutely.
Fire up ChatGPT and ask it where was Lucy and was she all in one piece.
Yeah, maybe you want to be more specific than that.
In fact, that question could be asked about me after a night on the tiles. Anyway, so interesting thing about Lucy's people is they were one of the earliest examples that we know were able to walk on two legs. Now, based on their bone structure, it looks more like a kind of a waddle instead of a walk. But they also could climb trees, so they were a kind of a dual-purpose body plan, and that adaptability probably helped them to survive as long as they did. Because, you know, they could live in forests or they could live in places that required them to walk, like out on the plains or whatever. It's kind of a pity, though, isn't it, that we humans have kind of lost our ability to tree climb. And
it's kind of kids still do it.
The kids still do it,
and everybody just goes, stop doing that, stop climbing trees.
Yeah. And then when we become adults, we become just more interested in social climbing. We lose that interest in tree climbing.
Speak for yourself again. Social climbing.
Right, we're going to move on to somebody else. Another interesting name. I like the ones that have the weird names. They're probably the least interesting scientifically, but the names are kind of notable. Next guy is Nutcracker Man from Tanzania. So Paranthropus bosei is the official name.
I think you should call him that. I think you should give him his official moniker, whatever you refer to him from now on. Paranthropus.
It's a pity the Beatles didn't somehow manage to come up with a chorus that rhymed with.
Paranthropus bosei in the sky.
Anyway, those guys also lasted about 1 million, but they were more recent, about 1 million years. They were between 1 and 2 million years ago is when they existed. And the reason our friend got named Nutcracker Man is because
they did ballet.
Yeah.
They were really good at ballet. They went
Oh,
straight
well.
from the trees to walking to ballet. They just jumped.
They did consider Mikado Man briefly. But no, he had pretty large, tough teeth and huge jaw muscles. So they kind of imagined that maybe he was cracking nuts with his teeth. I mean, you know, maybe when he went down to the pub on a Friday evening with his mates, he liked an old bag of KP nuts, you wouldn't know. But probably he was eating raw plants, roots, grasses, that kind of thing that required a lot of chewing. Now I have my own kind of theory, completely unfounded, or no evidence about
It's one of Sennon's theories. Here comes one of Sennon's theories. Write this down.
Why Nutcracker Man and his people have departed from this earth. You know, they had a relatively small brain. We know that from this fossil of the skull. So they're probably no challenge to Einstein, really. And I'd say once they realised they had teeth capable of chewing hard things, they started chewing granite because it tasted a little bit spicy due to the, you know, the radioactivity that's in granite. And of course, no nutrition in granite, so you know they died away in the end.
I would imagine their teeth wouldn't have lasted very long.
Yeah, that didn't help either, I'd say, because it was going to be hard then to suck the grass. Right, that's Nutcracker Man. We'll move on to Handyman.
Okay.
Handyman was one of the smarter ones. His brain was a bit bigger than Nutcracker Man, and his official moniker is Homo habilis.
Yes. This first, we've moved from Paranthropus bosei to
I'm impressed you remembered that.
Writing is a fantastic thing. Writing is amazing. When you write down something, you can read it. But okay, so now we're on to homos, of which we have quite the collection.
Yeah, obviously we're Homo sapiens, and there are about 10 of these pre-human species that have the name Homo something or other.
Yeah.
And they're genetically closer to us in the evolutionary tree than the other guys who I was speaking about earlier on. Mm-hmm. So this guy, Homo habilis, first use of simple tools. So the first creature we know that actually...
Leaf blower. It would have been very useful, I think, like kind of on the plains to have a leaf blower. You would have been out ahead, like just even in attracting a mate. I think if you saw a Homo habilis with a leaf blower, you'd be kind of, I like the cut of his tube.
Yeah, and you know, that wireless sander came in very handy when you were trying to smooth down the trunks of trees. But we're talking about like he might have picked up a nice oblong shaped stone and chipped it in half so that he'd have a sharp edge at one side of it. What they tend to call a fancy name, a hand axe, just a stone with a bit of a sharp
stone.
A sharp stone, that kind of thing. Basic tools, but still, tool use is considered by scientists to be, or was at least, to be an indicator of intelligence. There was a long time, up until maybe 40 or 50 years ago, that we thought that humans were the only creatures that used tools. Now we know that lots of other creatures, chimpanzees, crows even, use tools. So,
I realise this is depressing me. Like, I'm just useless at using tools. Like, just to a horrific level. Like, just, I mean... I don't know how many drills I've bought, and they're all still sitting there getting out of dust.
Lucky for you, there's dozens of crows on the roof of your house. So you just need to speak nice to them. They'll come down and they'll do all the tool work for you.
That's what we get done.
So he first user of tools. He also kind of partially walked upright. He
sounded more and more like me.
Yeah. On a Friday evening on the way home from the pub, partially upright is about as close as I can get to it. So, next one, we're moving rapidly along. The next one, Homo erectus, a really interesting bloke.
No jokes. We're not making any obvious jokes about this.
No, we're going to leave the juvenile jokes outside the room.
Yeah.
Anyway, the one particular example of Homo erectus was called Java Man, and he was called that because he liked a skinny latte first thing in the morning in the cave before he could.
Such an obvious joke. Yeah, that's such an obvious joke.
And it's completely unrelated to the fact that he was actually found on the island of Java. You know. So anyway, this guy had an even bigger brain than Handyman, and much more advanced tools, but also a lot of other interesting attributes that makes him more like a modern human. They used fire, first one known to use fire, right. For cooking or heat or whatever. We're fairly sure they built boats. because they travelled all over the world. Like a lot of these species, most of them originated in Africa, and these guys travelled and spread around the world, and including several islands in Asia that they couldn't have got to without using boats. So this is a species, a big jump forward. They walked fully upright, unlike the previous guy who kind of might have been a bit stooped over. They also were the longest lasting that we know of these pre-human species. They were around for we reckon about 1.5 million years. So these are real important guys. And it's like only about 100,000 years ago that they went extinct. So humanity, our ancestors, human beings, would have known these guys.
So we're not directly descended from these dudes. Existed.
Just to clarify what I'm describing here, all these different species, I'm not saying that, each one is the parent of another one that's the parent of another one.
Yeah.
What we're saying is that all of these species arose from a common ancestor that we have with chimps and bonobos.
Okay.
So they're more like siblings of ours than actual. Now some of them
distant cousins.
We're not certain, but some of them might be forebears of ours. But they could also be more regarded as siblings or cousins. Next thing we come on to, of course, everybody's favourite pre-human species, and that, of course, is the Neanderthals. Homo neanderthalensis, as they're known as officially. We know probably the most about these ones, which I suppose is why most people are aware of their existence, because we have found so many fossils from these guys. Again, they're a recent enough species, so humanity would have known them. Early human beings would have known them. They've only been gone for about 40,000 years, which is not very long ago at all.
Is that why there's so many fossils? Is that because the time?
Probably. Also, they were fairly widely distributed. They were over a wide area, but also, the fossils do degrade. More recent species were more likely to find fossils than older ones. But a couple of interesting facts about them: they had bigger brains than us and may well have been smarter than us.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a mystery, like they only went extinct 40,000 years ago. What happened to them? There's a dark theory that maybe we did them in.
I'd say you just didn't like the neighbours. They were just like, look at these guys. Look what these guys are up to.
Oh, they liked the neighbours all right.
Oh, really? Oh, no. This is like one of those housewives of Beverly Hills or something, is it? Neanderthals of Beverly Hills.
Because there are a certain number of modern humans in the world today who have snippets of Neanderthal DNA.
I think I know a few of them. Am I allowed to use real names? Maybe not.
Well, I just don't know if we have the legal fees. We could be both bankrupted. But clearly in the past, some human beings were especially friendly with their hairy Neanderthal neighbours because they were sharing DNA.
But we're originally 300,000 years ago, would humans, Homo sapiens, be remarkably different than Neanderthals? Would they look like us now, and the Neanderthals look kind of like, I don't know, more like an orangutan?
Well, the humans should have looked like us now, minus the tummy tuck and the Botox fillers and what have you.
Right, so basically humans look like they were at a festival.
Yeah. Like the Neanderthals, their skull shape is a little different. I mean, they would have, be recognisable immediately as not human.
Yeah, right.
But
so it's not like you were at a party and it was dark and you could have made a mistake.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there was a bit of that. Remember, they didn't really have electricity or candles or anything like that, so anything was possible in the long winter nights.
I think we're rewriting history now.
Any port in a storm, as they say. But they were pretty sophisticated creatures. Like they had very, very advanced tools, proper axes with handles that they fashioned to themselves and what have you. They made their own jewellery. They left behind art. There's Neanderthal cave paintings. They used fire for heating and cooking. They're pretty advanced, the Neanderthals. But the funny thing is this interspecies shenanigans was not all that rare, because there's another pre-human species called Denisovans who also have some of their DNA in modern humans. So there was obviously a bit of how's your father going on with them as well. So yeah, it was fun times back then.
And the Denisovans were from how long ago? Are they?
They're pretty recent too. They would have been contemporaries of the Neanderthals.
Yeah. But not as prolific or not as widespread.
There hasn't been that many fossils of that crowd of the Denisovans found, and it's such a recent find that they haven't even been given a proper Latin classification, so they probably will end up being Homo denisova or something like that, but right now they're just known as the Denisovans. So finally we come to the one species that actually makes the name of this episode the truth, or more or less the truth. So
what's the name of the episode again?
Extinct human species. So in East Africa, it's believed that 160,000 years ago there was a species of human only slightly different from us. Effectively a subspecies of our own species. And so they're called Homo sapiens idaltu. So like you're talking about really minor differences there. Like they're almost exactly the same as modern humans, just small differences.
An extra arm.
No, the nose and the back of the head, that kind of thing. Like just tiny, like small changes in the structure of the bones. Right. It's enough that the differences are enough that they're outside the range of what you might call the normal range of differences in humans. But they've only been discovered in a small area, one or two fossils. So we don't know a lot about them or even how long they were on Earth for, but one would assume they were around for a decent amount of time.
They could have been aliens. They could have been. They could have just visited.
We might all be. This is probably an episode for another podcast.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to throw it in there.
But so you've just mentioned
another hour for sending. Off we go.
You just mentioned a concept that is known as panspermia.
Oh God! You just wanted to get that word in there.
and it's the theory that the building blocks of life might have come to Earth on an asteroid that was driven off on other planets. So the basic idea is that some large lump of rock flying around in space crashed into, we'll say, Mars or some other planet, and it drove a lump of Martian rock. The impact drove a lump of Martian rock off the surface. Living on that rock maybe was some Martian microbes, and then it eventually flew through space for years and years, and eventually landed on Earth and seeded Earth with life. There's no proof whatsoever. It's a theory about the possibility of life spreading from one planet to another.
Join us for episode 38. We might come back to this.
Panspermia, yeah, it's an interesting idea. So we should briefly talk about walking, because walking, of course, can
be very difficult sometimes.
Walking can be extremely difficult, as some of our ancestors found out. But you might be tempted to assume that walking is something that arose hand in hand with intelligence. And there's a grain of truth to that, but only a grain. By walking, I mean walking on two legs. So once we developed hands that could grip things and the intelligence to use tools with those hands, it was, of course, convenient to be able to walk around the place and still carry or use those tools. So that was kind of one of the things that made it a good idea for us to walk. But aside from that, there was climate change going on about 6 million years ago. So before that period, the Earth was extensively covered in forest. And so you were talking about monkey-like creatures using their 4 legs, 4 arms and legs, 2 arms, 2 legs. Yes, thank you.
8 appendages now.
Maths is evading.
6 million years ago, there's monkeys with 8 arms and 8 legs.
Anyway, so they used those to climb around the trees. They might occasionally come down on the ground and crawl around in all 4s, but they needed all 4, to crawl around the trees. Then the climate change happened and the forests started to shrink, and grasslands, flat plains covered in very tall grass, started spreading to replace the forests. And suddenly you needed to be able to see over the grass.
To wave at the neighbours.
You wave at the neighbours, see what the neighbours are up to. Make sure the neighbours are not coming to steal everything you have and murder you and your family.
I don't like these neighbours.
You want to be able to see if predators are coming. You want to be able to see where your prey is. All of that stuff. You need to be able to look over the grass. You don't want to.
It makes it look like, because you would imagine that looking over the grass, that the predators could see you too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a two-way street. If they can see you, presumably you can see them, and you can run away. And that raises us to an interesting point. Actually, one of the downsides of walking on two legs is that four-legged creatures can sprint a lot faster than two-legged ones can. So your average lion or tiger is going to catch up with you pretty quick. Even a four-legged saltwater crocodile, like the ones they have in Australia, can run faster than people. So it's
with their little legs.
With their little legs, they can overtake people. Yeah.
I imagine only over short distance now. They wouldn't do 5K.
Oh yeah, we're talking about sprinting. I mean, the two-legged crowd, ourselves and any other creatures walking around two legs, they're able to go long distances quite efficiently. Very efficient use of energy. Like it's our ancestors out in the plains. They were kind of hunter gatherers who might have walked 30 kilometers in a day every day. And that was no problem. It was very energy efficient.
Should we be doing that? Should we be doing that? Working 30, would that be good for us now?
Well, it's interesting. This 10,000 steps thing that some of the step counter watches have.
Yeah, absolutely.
That started as a marketing wheeze by one of the watch companies. It wasn't based in science at all. But some scientists anyway decided to test out the theory, and they found that amazing coincidence. Sure enough, 10,000 steps was kind of the magic number that. Doing, say, 15,000 versus 10,000 in a day, there wasn't much additional health benefits. But doing less than 10,000, there was fewer health benefits than doing 10,000. So it's interesting that something that started out as some marketing guy's wheeze actually
someone guessed the right answer. That's all it is. Somebody guessed the right answer.
Yeah. That's walking and.
But I mean. So should we be attempt like I imagine? So 10,000 steps, right? Great. 15,000 steps, not much of a difference. But if you're doing 30k,
that's a bit more.
That's slightly more than 10,000 steps. So would 30k be good for us as hunter gatherers of old?
Well, the wear and tear on our joints and on our back and stuff probably wouldn't have become apparent until we were over normal childbearing age.
We've jumped somewhere there now. Wait a minute.
So your first...
Childbearing, where did that come into it?
Well, we're talking about evolutionary pressure here, right? So after you've gone past the age where you're normally having children, evolution doesn't care about you. So if you're back...
It is a terrible thing to say. And also very depressing.
Evolution is quite happy to see you die out in a ditch if the environment...
If you can't 50
adapt to the environment.
You're not doing any good.
So if your hips and your knees and your back all can put up with walking on two legs 30 kilometers a day until such time as you've delivered children into the world, evolution is perfectly happy. You can then fall over for all it cares.
So it doesn't bode well for are we living too long? Is what you're saying now? As far as in evolutionary terms,
some people probably shouldn't have lived longer than a few days, but we're stuck with them. But anyway, I had some back trouble myself, and my back doctor had a funny turn of phrase. I asked him why the hell was he so busy with so many patients, and. He said, God gave us a clothesline and we're using it as a flagpole.
So I think you're going to need to explain that.
Yeah. So his point was that our backbone, our vertebrae and our backbone evolved when we were walking on all four legs. So it was normally horizontal to the ground and the weight of our body was hanging off it horizontally. But now since we started walking on two legs, it's now vertical. We hold it vertical and all the weight goes down through it. So it's putting pressure on the bones, putting pressure on the discs that are in between the bones and so on. So although we have evolved a lot of adaptations to allow us walk properly on two legs, walk efficiently on two legs, our back design still needs to evolve a bit further to cope with that, and as do our hips and our knees and things.
But evolution has absolutely no desire to help us do that.
No, none whatsoever. No.
Yeah. No. So the likelihood of it happening is...
No, we will just have to rely on a robo-skeleton being applied.
Robo-skeletons, I like where this is going.
So that's all about pre-human species and the wonderful world of things that were alive once upon a time but are no longer around.
And now we've come to it then, just before we finish, we've come to a new section I'm going to surprise Shannon with called Limerick of the Day. So whatever our topic is, we have to try and write a limerick about.
That'd be a good name for a movie, actually. The Day of the Limerick. I can imagine it being a Marvel blockbuster.
Or a really a black and white kind of artsy kind of film with like children running down barefoot streets while people
barefoot
read limericks.
Streets. I have yet to see a street wearing a pair of shoes.
Yes. So the winner in our prize for our limerick of the day was there once was a Homo erectus who
Careful now.
prepared a detailed prospectus. He told all his peers that in 1 million years scientists may dig us up and inspect us. And I think that brings us to the end.
That deserves a round of applause.
So that brings us to the end of this episode of Enough with the Science. I'm Joe.
And it's Enough with the Joe. I'm Senan.
Oh, okay, thanks for listening. Hope you'll join us next time.